New details about the Chattanooga gunman. A friend telling CNN the shooter thought was about ISIS was, quote, a stupid group. That's his quote about ISIS. And authorities are revealing writings from the shooter showing that he was displeased with the war on terror. So what does this say about motive? Let's bring in former Congressman Mike Rogers, who's a CNN national security commentator and former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Mike, thank you for the help, as always. There is a notion that the motive should be clear. This was some type of distracted, deranged jihadist who hated America. What else do we need to know? Your take.
Well, I think that's right. You know, remember, radicalization is a process. So he had certainly some mental issues. He had rampant drug use that was apparently affecting his interaction with his social group. His parents had sent him to Jordan for some time, hopefully to get him off alcohol and drugs, but something clearly happened there. But we have to remember, even though he said, hey, I don't like ISIS, he used martyrdom. He talked about martyrdom. He talked about that notion in radical Islam that committing an act of violence and then losing my own life is a purification way and closer to his religion. And he was having all of those pressures at home about not being a good Muslim. He felt that this was the way. So all of those messages, all of that narrative out there on social media and other things from ISIS and Al-Qaeda and others about martyrdom, about the jihad, all of those things resonated, and I think it resulted. Remember, he didn't go down to just randomly find store clerks. He targeted unarmed military personnel.
He, by his own admission, was not a particular fan of ISIS, but I get you on the personal side of this collective experience, multifactorial, including mental health aspects that aren't getting as much attention, I think, because of the intensity of interest in jihadism right now, especially in the U.S. Right. But people in your community offer something else up. They say, no, I'm not so fascinated about the personal narrative. I care about motive because motive includes who was giving him this information, where he was getting it, and if there were any loose or stronger affiliations here or in Jordan. That's what motive is to us. Help me understand that.
Well, it's critical. Remember, the problem that we're having with ISIS success in the United States or Al-Qaeda, when you're recruiting these young folks into the notion that you're going to show up in Syria and fight jihad, is narrative. It is very attractive. So it's a process. So you have to find somebody who is lacking identity in their community. Well, he fits that profile. It's a process. You need to talk to somebody that can work you into the position that martyrdom is consistent with your religion. I think it's inconsistent with Islam, but in this case, that's what they're preaching. And then you have to have the right circumstances. Well, he had all of those things fit this profile. So I think motive is important in the sense that you need to understand, hey, was ISIS directly targeting him? Was there an Al-Qaeda somebody that helped him along? And it's not just because they might be back in Jordan. Those individuals in Jordan might be talking to people in Tennessee or New York or California or Michigan. So I think investigators have to run that down, and they have to make that determination. But at the same time, you can't discount this is a self-radicalized, and he did that based on his personal circumstances. Again, when you look at old law enforcement models, Chris, when you look at how street gangs are successful in taking pretty good kids and getting them into gangs to do bad things, there's a process and there's a spectrum. And this fits that criteria to me when I look at it almost perfectly.
Why is it that narrative that winds up being so relevant and not the drug addiction, mental health issues for a long time aspect? Seems like that's not getting the attention that the other aspect is.
Well, those are factors of what he based his decision on, and I think that's why they're making that determination. So they've got to rule out, and I would not rule out yet that there was some outside influence. Somebody walked him through the process of martyrdom. We need to know who that person is. And so it could be today it's this person who was Muslim, who felt disaffected, who felt he was not living up to what he needed to live up to and his standards for both his family and his community, being a Muslim. All of those were factors for radicalization. Remember, those are exactly the kind of people that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are targeting. Those they're going after. That's why I think that component of it, Chris, is so important. What we ought to do generally is go back and say, we've got a youth drug problem. If you look at the shootings in South Carolina, he had mental illness, and drugs that affected his psychology were critically impactful on him going through and killing those innocent people. So, yes, that's a whole societal thing we better start getting a handle on. Our youth, we're losing a generation of youth to a very pervasive drug society. And when you compound that with mental illness, we have a huge problem. In this case, his motivation was radical Islam and martyrdom, and that was very clear in some of his writings I've seen.
Many in the clinical community marvel at the fact that our culture doesn't yet see intense drug addiction as a form of mental illness. Mike Rogers, thank you very much for helping us break this down and why it's so important to develop the why in a situation like this. Appreciate it.